Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's continuation of the What's Next series covers the Philadelphia 76ers, who were just knocked out of the Eastern Conference playoffs by a ridiculous Kawhi Leonard game winner and the Toronto Raptors. And I think that it's safe to say that for the last two seasons, the 76ers have been the most traumatic team in the entire NBA. Whether that relates to issues within the front office, the Markelle Fultz saga, chemistry issues within the team and with Coach Brett Brown, the trades for Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris, whatever it is, there always seemed to be a ton going on with this team over the past few seasons, and that makes for an incredibly interesting offseason for them given how their season ended. Let's begin with a quick review. They finished with a similar record to what they had last season and made two huge moves to try and push themselves into at least the Eastern Conference Finals mid-season. The first was trading for Jimmy Butler from the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the second was bringing in Tobias Harris from the LA Clippers. Both of these moves were seen as high risk but also high reward moves, giving up future assets such as Dario Saric, Robert Covington, Landry Shamet, and a future Heat pick in exchange for immediate help in the form of 2019 free agents Butler and Harris. And even though they didn't advance as far in the postseason as they would have hoped, and that's probably going to cost Brett Brown his job, the real impact of those moves on the future of this team will be determined this offseason. Moving on now, let's talk about some building blocks for the Sixers. And this is a strange version of this section because really every player that I'm going to talk about has some kind of caveat that goes along with them. First is Joel Embiid, who is a supremely talented player and one of the best bigs in the entire league, and at times dominant inside force that simply can't be matched by most other teams. But durability is a question for him moving forward. He missed a ton of time early in his career with lower body injuries, and that once again became an issue this year when he missed some time even in the playoffs with a sore knee. Now, you can certainly blame the team for not being more careful about his minutes during the regular season and that causing his late season issues, but regardless, it's something to keep in mind when discussing the long-term value of Embiid to the Sixers. Next is Ben Simmons, who is still just 22 years old and extremely talented as well, but his complete lack of a jump shot and how that affects his game in the half court and the spacing of his team, especially in the playoffs, are going to be big concerns for the Sixers moving forward. There are moments where it looks like he's figured out a way to work around his biggest weakness, but they're always fleeting and pretty inconsistent, and there's been almost no visible progress towards him becoming anything remotely close to a respectable NBA shooter. And with a contract year coming up for him and the big investment that will come along with that, his game is also a big concern. Next up are Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris, both of whom are really good players, but they also come with the same issue, being a 2019 unrestricted free agent. Butler has a $19 million player option for next season that he's going to turn down, while Harris's contract is expired, and the market for both of them should be significant. Butler is the better player and will likely get a max offer from somebody despite some of the baggage that comes with him, while Harris is younger and has a ton of versatility to his game that should elevate his value on the open market as well. We'll talk more about their situation specifically in the free agency section, but just know that clearly these two guys are critically important to this team moving forward. In terms of other building blocks, there are some minor inclusions, such as JJ Redick, who is old but has also been an important piece of this team since he signed as a free agent 2 years ago and is also a free agent, in addition to some young guys like Zaire Smith and Jonah Bolden, who are two of the few players under contract for the Sixers next season, but are still relatively young and haven't shown anything tangible to really place them clearly in the building block conversation for this team. With that said, typically I would move on to the draft next, but honestly there isn't much to talk about here in comparison to the many directions the Sixers could go in free agency. They have the 24th pick in the draft, and unless some crazy protections between them and the Kings and the Celtics actually come through, they'll end up with the 24th pick after the draft lottery. That selection isn't likely to have a big impact on their season next year, so I'm going to choose to instead cover the much bigger variable here, free agency. And when you look at the Sixers payroll, things do get a bit tricky. These are the players under contract for next season right now: Embiid, Butler's player option that he'll turn down, Ben Simmons, the partially guaranteed contract of Jonathan Simmons, Smith, Bolden, and the player option of James Ennis. And that's it, which leaves not only Butler, Harris, and Redick, but other key members of the rotation as well without a contract for next season. On the bright side, they do have the rights to bring back all of those players, and even if they didn't, they have a ton of cap space, about $42 million worth, to go in a different direction if they chose to. But there are a couple of things to evaluate and unpack here, and to me the most important is definitely what to do about Jimmy Butler. There's no doubt that he is a great player, an all-star caliber player, but he does have issues as a free agent. First, as we all know, he's never been the easiest guy to play with, and he's had problems, whether he caused them or not, with teammates and or coaches on 3 different teams now in a pretty short time span. In addition to that, he turns 30 in September and has had some injury issues as well. So the length and value of the contract would typically be in question in this scenario, but because of the circumstances of this NBA offseason with so much cap space available around the league, Jimmy Butler is very likely going to receive a max contract this summer, which means if the Sixers want to keep him, they'll have to pay him a max to do so, and that's the core of the issue here. Butler is the worst case scenario for a team that wants to bring back one of its key players as a free agent. Either they let Butler walk and lose not only his value to the team, but they also get nothing out of the pieces they traded for him, or they bring him back on a huge deal that'll likely only be worth on an annual basis for the next 1 to 2 years at most, before becoming an overpaid liability in his mid-30s. If it was up to me, I wouldn't want to bring Butler back if I were the Sixers on a max contract, simply because they have the young talent and the flexibility to go in a different direction that doesn't involve pinning their hopes on Butler staying productive and healthy through his 30s on a big contract. I would understand if you guys argued for them to keep him and try and chase a title within the next year or two, but that doesn't seem like the most sustainable approach to me. Moving on now to Harris, his situation is a bit more complicated simply because it isn't as clear what kind of contract offers he will receive this summer as it is for Butler. He could end up with a max offer from a free agent needy team, or a more team-friendly deal might end up being the result of his free agency. But regardless, I would expect the Sixers to be more motivated to bring him back than Butler, simply because of his age, versatility, and the expense of his next contract. However, if the offers he receives start to creep towards the max contract level, then I don't think that the Sixers will be interested in bringing him back at that price. So that will be the big determining factor in whether or not they choose to bring him back. And that same reasoning extends to JJ Redick as well, who I'm sure the Sixers would like to bring back, but maybe not on as expensive of deals as he signed the last 2 years. With the situations of those 3 players in mind, here are some directions that the Sixers could go this summer. First, they could simply bring back all 3 of them no matter the cost, using up all their cap space, count on the continued progression of Simmons, Smith, and whoever they select with the 24th pick, with the flexibility of the mid-level exception to try and add more role player support around their core. This would obviously be the most expensive option, with the payroll likely getting pretty close to the luxury tax, but would also give them a good chance of competing for an Eastern Conference Finals appearance next year. Remember, even as doom and gloom as things might seem from some perspectives now, this team was incredibly close to defeating the Raptors and being 1 series away from the finals. So bringing it back with a similar group might result in a better postseason finish next year, depending on how the other free agency dominoes fall around the league. The second option would be to just bring back Harris and use the rest of their cap space to improve the rest of the roster around him and Embiid and Simmons. For example, if they brought him back on a deal worth $22 million a year, they'd have $20 million in cap space left this summer to bring in whatever they want, whether that be an actual point guard or shooting, wing defenders. It doesn't really matter because they'll have options in free agency with that cap space. The third option would be to let everybody walk and use the full $42 million in space to try and sign a max player or a handful of complementary options around Simmons and Embiid. The issue is, I'm not sure what max free agent would be convinced to sign in Philadelphia for plenty of reasons, but also because that hasn't really been much of a possibility to think about throughout the year. Which then brings us to the fourth option, which is a radical one that has about a 1% chance of actually happening, but still needs to be mentioned anyway, and that is the combination of any of the first 3 options, but also trading Ben Simmons to a different team. This is an idea that's been floated around throughout the year simply because Simmons at this point in his career is a kind of player that needs to have a team built around him, and his skill set doesn't really work all that well with the need to feature Embiid in the post as well. And they'd be able to get back a significant return for him given his immense talent and youth. This is an issue that's going to need a solution relatively soon, with Simmons being a restricted free agent next summer. In the end, the days of roster flexibility and rookie contracts are largely over in Philadelphia. and now the hopes of them being true contenders are going to hinge on their ability to make the correct front office moves with limited flexibility, and that would make me nervous if I was a Sixers fan. It's strange how somber the mood around the future of the team seems to be, considering that they have two great young players on the roster and under contract, but when you consider their free agency options and the moves they've made in the last 9 months to try and chase a title and the cost of them, this season's failure to reach the conference finals and the ensuing offseason honestly could spell the end of all the future hope and promise that the struggles of the process era once provided. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.